Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jason Stein. I'm here with New Age Social Media Group. Uh, Presenting with me is Charmaine Beluso and Jack Hannon. Kate Kleinschmidt cannot be with us today, but she contributed to this project. Our presentation is about how social and communication channels shape and challenge a participatory culture in software development. This paper was written by Margaret Ann Story, Alexei Zygalski, Fernando Figuera, Philo Leafsinger, and Daniel Garman. Charmaine, I'll pass it over to you for the next bit of information.
Cool. So the abstract on this paper plainly states that software developers use many different communication tools and channels in their work, and over time, the amount of tools has increased. These communication channels allow developers to engage, learn, and co-create with other developers. This paper is written to understand the interplay of these social channels within the participatory development culture. To do this, the authors have conducted a survey with 1,449 GitHub users to get their input on how these channels affect their work. For starters, software development has transitioned from a predominantly solo activity of developing standalone programs to a very collaborative and participatory approach for large and complex systems. This results in developers being involved in multiple projects. To keep up with the complexity of these systems, developers want to be engaged, learn, and create with other developers while acquiring skills, contributing, and making connections. The most logical approach for collaboration is social tools and communication channels, which fosters creativity, promotes engagement, and encourages participation within these projects. Bottom line is that the collaboration and communication is essential for software developers in order to maintain order, ideas, and progress. As a result, development tools are now often integrated within communication channels and social media. Shared knowledge is essential for project growth and documentation purposes, and communication channels within development tools support this. To overview the paper aims to investigate the participatory development culture and find out the challenges that developers face when using various communication channels. Within this paper, they answer a few questions. Who is the social programmer that participates in these communities? What communication channels are the most important to developers and why? What communication channels do these developers use to support development activities? And what challenges do developers face using an ecosystem of communication channels to support their activities? Within the background section of the paper, it goes over communities of practice, which are groups of people connected by the similarity of their activities. For example, in open source projects, professionals and hobbyists may contribute to the same project regardless of their time zone, city, and etc. Within software development, project management tools and communication channels such as chats, email lists, and blogs are tools that are central to the success and longevity of large projects, which emphasizes the importance of media. Media plays a critical role in how knowledge is shared, formed, manipulated, and captured. The inclusion of more social aspects over time has led to an increase of knowledge that is stored in community resources and social networks, as seen in this graph. This research is motivated by the fact that the interplay of social channels within the participatory culture of software development is still unclear and not well understood. This research wants to understand how communication channels and social media plays a part in sharing knowledge within this community. To reach this goal, the authors designed and conducted a survey to learn how developers use tools to support their knowledge activities, what media channels are important to them, and what challenges they face. This survey was sent out during two different times, the end of 2013 and the end of 2014. The data downloaded was limited to the most recently active GitHub users with public email addresses according to GitHub API and archive. For the second iteration, users used for the first iteration was ignored. This is a few examples or information about the population of who was used in the survey. So it was sent out to 7,000 active GitHub users, 2,000 active GitHub users in December 2014 for the second iteration. And in both, respectively, 1,492 responded to the first survey and 332 were used for the second survey. And combined, there was 1,449 survey responses that were used. GitHub was used primarily because it's the most widely used social coding platform by developers for open source domain. This survey inquired about the developers' demographics used for a set of 11 development activities listed here. The survey questions related to the activities all follow the same form, a matrix of options that the survey respondents could select from to indicate that an item was used for the corresponding activity. The social channels specified in the matrix were determined from the author's own knowledge as developers, as well as through feedback from fellow developers, and then refined using research and piloted surveys. The developers were asked to rank the most important tools and channels they use to support development activities and explain why these tools were important. The survey also aimed to understand what challenges developers face using social channels, privacy interruptions, and feeling overwhelmed. And then I'll hand it over to Jason.
Cool. So let's take a look at some of these demographics that the surveys came up with. So predominantly male users on GitHub that were recently active. The ages were 23 to 32, which is also not surprising because most of these projects get published after we graduate. That's kind of how the people are using GitHub. The team sizes. The most common ones were 2 to 3 and 4 to 5, with 4 to 5 being the most common. We see groups of 4 to 5 in our project, as well as what was recommended by the university. So I also know that for specific software engineering projects involved in artificial intelligence and whatnot, they need groups of 4 to 5 players because each one of them has a specific role. So this is not surprising to me. The years of programming experience, 2 to 5 being the most heavily populated portion. Also not surprising. I assume that after you've had a few years of experience with programming and you're trying to publish some of your work, you want to build up your resume, that's going to be the prime time for you to do it. The number of projects, I would not actually, I would think that there would be more projects, but the communication channels that they use. Now, this is very, very, very important given the time that we're in right now. Code hosting has always been the most important part of communication between developers. Luckily, face-to-face is not the most important, and during a pandemic, we can't have face-to-face, but we have the ability to just use code hosting as our way of primarily keeping up communication. The other ones, as you see, are kind of not as used. They provide adequate feedback for developers and adequate communications, but code hosting it really takes the cake here, and it's kind of a hit to communication in general to not be able to have face-to-face interactions. So we have to see really how the lack of face-to-face interactions is going to play a role in development going forward. But according to our graph, uh, it looks like we're going to be okay losing it, but we will have to see when the data comes out. And Jack, you're up with the next one.
So the challenges that the survey looked at specifically came in two basic types, which were the top three that they were specifically measuring, which was privacy, distractions, and a general feeling of being overwhelmed by the sheer number of communication options offered to them by their experience. Privacy was the least common concern that they measured. They expected there to be some sort of age skew, but it ended up being similarly unimportant to most demos. And then there were the additional challenges that people just filled in on the survey sheet when they got to the end. And these have a wide range of different responses that they used so a decision tree to sort into a few key categories. Categories listed like developer issues, like issues with the overall hierarchy of the project, collaboration between individual programmers, just general communication difficulties, as well as difficulties specifically with the channels used to communicate. And finally, just general like knowledge dispersal, the way that knowledge was given out, and whether it conflicted with other knowledge or whether all the knowledge coalesced properly. So yeah, the first set of weaknesses, as far as general developer issues, it was just a sense of being distracted and interrupted by constant requests for the communication, just group messaging, face to face on video chat, and technology just kind of getting in the way at times with just constant interruptions. The same kind of general theme with keeping up with technology is as the tools change, it's always a struggle to keep up with it and not be distracted by it. As far as collaboration between programmers, it's just a problem with the lack of tools, because you can't get good feedback without good sharing and code explaining tools, and that's the kind of collaborative coding tools that are already insufficient. So as far as community building, general cultural factors, geographic factors, time zone factors, these are all things that were mentioned, as well as just the general difficulty of finding developers, which is, some people have mentioned that it was less of a problem now due to things like GitHub, but remains a general issue. As far, and normal human communication problems, just miscommunication of a normal type. The necessity of face-to-face communication was mentioned. It's a great way to communicate when it's an option, but obviously not always an option. And so when it's not, then it becomes a problem. Just general difficulty of people. That was also a thing mentioned in many of the surveys, just personality disputes, attitude problems, just normal stuff in a workplace. And then there were these three categories of problems with communication channels, which was affordances, which is generally what an environment offers to a person in that environment. So the sheer number of and type of communication channels offered to any individual worker could be overwhelming, could contribute to that overwhelmingness mentioned earlier. This sort of information goes on this sort of information goes on that, or maybe they all share the same channels, which leads to literacy problems too, where people who are assigning you to use these channels don't even fully understand how they work, and so they can't really instruct you on how to use them, and so you may end up never knowing how to use them properly or to their fullest power, which also leads to channel friction, where channels are used inconsistently or they're not updated properly, or basically anything that prevents the channels from actually working as fully as they could for the whole organization, which is another thing that leads to the next point, which is knowledge fragmentation, content fragmentation. Info is distributed across all these channels, and it's sometimes difficult for programmers to know which channels they need to look at first for certain pieces of information, and even the quality sometimes, because you don't know whether the information will still be relevant after a certain time, and you'll turn to one communication channel and you'll have certain information there that is not really relevant anymore, where if you'd looked at a different channel, you'd have the right information. So that was another issue mentioned. Suggestions listed by the survey, by this paper, were sixfold. You have general awareness of channels and what channels are afforded to workers, just to be understanding of what all options are actually out there for workers to communicate with each other and with the head developers and whoever else they need to communicate with. They also mentioned an idea of a communication covenant, where they just go over and make perfectly clear what communication channels will be used for what types of information, or on some sort of schedule, or any sort of way that makes it clear to members of a team how information will be distributed about this project, which can get a little overwhelming. So they also suggest that you think lean when it comes to this stuff, and as few the number of channels that you can have is probably for the better, where reasonable, of course. You can keep up with the latest tools is also important. It's like code hosting software, any sort of collaborative coding is always important, as mentioned earlier. More tools for code commenting and that sort of thing. Channel literacy, this goes along with the awareness of channels, but specifically to just make sure that you know how the channels that you're having your members communicate over, that you actually understand how they work, so that you can inform on how to use these channels to their best potential. And then finally, the importance of unplugging. Just every now and then you need to turn it off. Just, log off and then let your brain process what's been communicated previously. Some notable limitations of this survey, as previously mentioned, there's some demographics, homogeneousness, homogeneosity. 60% at least were in web development, where tools are obviously a big problem. Tools change constantly and are updated on the fly, and often conflict with others. They also they estimated a certain percentage of their demographic to be North American male, middle class, but it was even more male than they expected, which is unclear if that relates to the data at all. But it's a notable thing to point out, as well as the fact that the survey was very long. They said it was multiple several dozen questions. So many participants might have eventually given up on the survey or just moved on in their head, as well as I mentioned, tools changing much faster than the rate of the study. Now I'll turn it back over to Jason.
All right, so a couple of key contributions for the information collecting, the survey that we used, or that was used. We saw some of the limitations come up before, but we do know that it provided some good insight. The demographics the survey targeted, that was a crucial part of the data, the collection. Which channels used by developers that support their development activities, and which ones are most important to them. So we got to cover that. And then challengers developing face using a broad spectrum of tools while engaging in participatory development work practices. Future works studies will be extended to commercial projects with different constraints and restrictions. The themes themselves that emerged in this study from the contributions we saw before will help form a new version of the survey. Hopefully it will include a post-2020 survey that has more information about non-face-to-face practices and lifting the limitations behind needing face-to-face work. Future work also could contain continuing developing a descriptive theory on how different channels of affordances may shape participatory development activities. These can be used to help developers and tool designers anticipate benefits and challenges certain combinations of tools may bring. And it might reveal new opportunities to improve tools and work practices. So that suggests that researchers may play a bigger role in tool design by understanding the implications of the tools that are used and revealing ways they may be improved. So just having more transparency about everything that they're using in their work, and then improving what they use, keep track of everything that might be able to go better along the way. If you design something for your team in specific, like a random web developing team, which 60% of the participants were web dev, that actually helps you communicate better, maybe organizes the channels or makes stuff a lot smoother and easier to communicate with. That would be huge. That's part of what the future work of this survey is all about. And so the results and conclusions of the survey: communication channels shape and challenge the participatory culture in software development. However, the reverse is also true. Not much is understood about the impact of the participatory culture on software development practices and the communication channels developers use. Software developers are referred to as the knowledge worker prototype, as they are not only the first to use and shape tools and channels, but also have far lower barriers to build and tweak them. Thank you for listening to our presentation.